Hi, my name is Kelly O'Gorman. Some of you may know me for my artwork and illustrations, and some of you may already own my colouring books or products. I'm creating this video because I've been using Derwent Inktense pencils for about 3 years now, and people often tell me that they have the pencils but they're not quite sure how to use them. So I've created this tutorial to see if I can help better explain how they work and how I personally use them. I've been practicing colouring the letter I, comprising of irises and ivy, from my Flora and Fauna colouring book. I experimented with different colour combinations and I asked my Facebook followers the colour option they preferred. And from those comments I picked the colours to use in this tutorial. So this is my tin of Derwent Inktense. It's a 72 pencil tin. I was actually gifted this tin by a friend who sadly passed away, but it was quite strange, as in no less than a month after I received them, I was asked to demonstrate them on TV. Derwent Inktense are different to watercolour pencils. They're actually water-soluble ink pencils. They behave differently to watercolour pencils because once laid down and water activated, they become permanent. So let's get started. I'm going to start with the iris petals using 3 colours: a light purple, a darker shade of purple and a blue, mauve, red violet and dark aquamarine. I like to make sure that my pencils are sharp because the thinner the point, the easier it is to colour small areas. And I always like to test my colours before I use them, as the colour of the ink is not always as accurate as the colour indicated on the end of the pencil. I'm laying down a small area of colour with medium pressure, and the harder you lay down the colour, the more intense the colour will be, and the lighter your pressure, the lighter the shade. As soon as the water hits that colour, it just comes to life. So as I was saying earlier, Inktense are ink-based pencils. Because of their ink properties, they do not blend together like watercolours. In order to mix the colours, you will have to use layering techniques, which I will show in this video. As I mentioned earlier, I will be using a watercolour brush instead of a normal paintbrush. I'm using a Kuretake Zig water brush. These brushes come in various sizes. This is quite a thin brush. These brushes are great if you are travelling because you simply unscrew the end to fill them up with water, and therefore you don't have to mess about with a separate pot of water. It's built into the brush. Right, let's get the image we are going to colour. I've chosen the letter I from my Flora and Fauna colouring book, an image of ivy and irises so I can create a lovely mixture of purples and greens. I will be providing this image as a free download, see the link below, so you can download it and print it off yourself. First of all, I'm placing paper underneath the image. I will be using this sheet to test out my colours before I apply them. And with a cup of tea, ready to go. I'm starting to lay down the blue colour quite lightly, staying away from the centre of the petal. You don't have to be too precise here because when we add the water, we can spread and push that watered ink out to the edges. Now to the top part of the flower. I'm not leaving a white gap on the top petals this time. Now I'm using the golden yellow pencil to colour the very base of each of the bottom petals. And I'm not going right up to the blue part, instead I'm leaving a white gap between the two colours. Next I will be using the lighter purple, my red violet colour pencil, to add colour to the edges of the petals. I'm using slight upward strokes of varying lengths. It may help to follow the shading I've included on the drawing as to where to add this colour. I'm adding small sections of colour because when I add the water I want a variation of colour. I'm shading any part of the petal in purple that I feel would be in shadow, so those petals behind also need to be darker. If you wanted the purple shade to be even darker in areas, then you just apply more pressure and this will give a deeper tone. Now to add the water. On my undersheet paper I'm just testing out the water flow on my brush. I don't want too much water, just a little, enough to activate the colours, and you may find that depending on the type of paper you're using, the amount of water you may need to use will differ. Some papers are more absorbent than others, but with normal thinner paper, the less amount of water, the better. You can see that as soon as the water hits that colour, it immediately brings vibrancy. Starting with the yellow first, remembering to leave that white gap. Then washing my brush and then starting on the purple edges of the petal, working upwards. I move the brush in upward movements towards the white gap in the centre of the petal. Adding more water when I need to. So you can see the difference between the dry pencil and the water activated ink pencil. If the water gets too much for the paper, then I would suggest having a kitchen towel sheet to hand. You can really see the variation in colour on the pencils by just using the blue and the purple together. I'm going to add some more of my lighter shade of purple to give this iris even more depth. And for this I'm going to be applying the colour in a different way, and I'm going to be working directly from the brush. I simply take the colour directly off the pencil with my wet brush. I personally find this an easier way to work. Before I apply the colour, I'm just going to test it on my undersheet. I might need to experiment with the amount of water to ink I'm using just to make sure I get the strength of colour I'm after, and also to check I'm not overloading the drawing with water. Now I'm applying that colour sparingly here and there to give more depth and texture to those petals. Again, I would encourage you to experiment. I've coloured this iris 4 times, all with different outcomes. I would try to keep water use to a minimum, because the paper, when it gets overloaded with water, sometimes it begins to crinkle. Just adding shadow here and there, giving it a bit more depth. Now I'm going to use my dark purple colour to give even more depth and shading. This is my mauve. Again, I'm working directly from the brush. So I'm applying that darker shade where the shadow shading would be seen. Again, you can use the drawing shading as a guide. Anything that sits behind something will need to be in shadow. Now I'm going to start applying these very thin veins of colour to the centre of the iris. Just adding more of these deep lines of colour, especially up the centre of the petal. I think that really gives a good effect. So it's like a branch, it's coming from the centre of the petal and then going outwards. I'm also going to add some orange tones to the centre of the flower. It's a little bit here and there. And I'm going to darken that tone of petal at the back. Now I'm going to move on to the other parts of the flower. So just adding that purple and blue mix again to that budding petal and activating with water. I'm going to colour the other iris now using this colour palette. I will be using purples and pinks with a slight grey-green blend for the centre. Here's my grey pencil. Working directly from the pencil again. Testing my ratio of ink to water and also the shade of grey on my test paper. I want to start with a real light shade of grey. I'm just applying this to the base of the flower petals, following the lines of the drawing, but also keeping some of that white space. Now I'm going to start with a light shade of purple, my red violet pencil again. And because I want to leave a bigger white area to the centre of these petals, I'm going to apply this colour just to the edges. The top petals are going to have full purple coverage, so I'm applying this colour fully. Now add water. Again, make sure there's not too much water on the brush, and I'm applying the water in upward strokes. Don't worry about being too precise here. as we'll be adding other layers of colour over this shortly. Just going over all those top petals with the water. While this layer dries, I'm going to move on to the leaves for a bit, and I'll be using a medium green. So I'm going to apply this base layer to all of the leaves and the stems. I'm not pressing hard at all, it's quite a light coverage. And then I'm going to add the water again. Again, making sure my brush hasn't got too much water on it. Right, now to the leaves. Luckily, I have some ivy growing in my garden and I really like the pattern on these. So I'm going to try to colour my leaves in a similar way. I think it's lovely if you can work from the real thing, and I always try my best to where I can. I'm going to start with the lightest colour on the leaves, and this is round the edge. And I'm using this amber pencil, which comes out as a lightish greenish colour. So I'm applying this colour all over the leaves. Again, quite light. And now I'm going to activate the ink with water. While I let this leaf area dry, I'm going to go back and work on the iris. So I'm going with a deeper purple colour, and once this layer's dried, you can either choose to work directly on the image with the dry pencil. So I'm applying that dry pencil to the dried layer. Again, I'm using those upward strokes. I'm applying the petal edges sparingly, leaving gaps so that the lighter purple layer shows through. And then I'm adding the water. The other way, you can choose to take the ink directly off the pencil, as we were looking at before, with a wet brush. So there's two different ways here that you can use the pencil. I'm not only applying those lines to the centre of the petal, I'm also applying them to the edge of the petal as well. And I'm using different tones of that same colour. So by watering it down, it's a lighter shade. By using less water, it's a deeper shade. So with the same pencil you can get a range of colours as well. I'm going to add a very slight greenish tint to that white area of the petal. It's very subtle. And now I'm going to use a little bit of grey just to deepen that shading on the inside. I'm going to add a little bit of highlight of yellow here too, just to give some extra warmth to the petals and to kind of mirror the iris on the other side as well. Again, very subtle. Oops, there's a bit too much there, but not to worry, because if I just wet my brush and while it's still relatively wet, I can just kind of pull that layer off. It's really coming together now. I'm really happy with it. So I'm going to add a little bit of shading to that closed bud, and I'm using the deepest shade from my first flower, so that's the mauve, and I'm adding colour to where the shadow would fall again, so to the base of the petals or petals that fall behind petals. That's where I'm adding it. Again, another slight smudge there, but not to worry, I just wipe it off with a wet brush. Now I'm going to add some darker greener tones to those leaves and stems. Using the drawing shading as a guide, I'm adding darker green to those areas. I'm now going to try and create this effect on the leaves. I'm going to start by applying a medium shade of green to the inner area of the leaves in patches. Now I'm going to apply my darkest shade of green in a similar patchy way. And I'm adding my water now. You can see that the colours don't fully blend, which is great because you maintain those areas of light and dark colour. I'm now going to add some more brown green tones to those leaves, so I've chosen this oak ink pencil. Working directly from the pencil to wet brush and applying in patches. I'm going to use the same oak colour to give some depth and texture to those stems. I'm going to add this where the shadow would fall. I just want a little more variation of colour on those leaves, so I'm going to bring in a bluer green tone here. Green aquamarine. Just applying it here and there. Now to add that last deepest shadow, I'm using the Indian ink pencil. And I'm going to really go in where those shadows fall now. And I would suggest practice, just keep experimenting, and the more you use these pencils, the better you will get, and you'll look at a drawing and you'll know how you're going to approach it. It's all about practice. I hope that you've gained some more knowledge of these pencils and that it will inspire you to go away with a bit more confidence and try them out for yourself. Many thanks for watching. Till next time. Bye bye.